Hi, I'm Emily from emilylearning.com. In this lesson, I want to talk more about rounding off of numbers and decimals, which you have already covered in primary school. So you can look at this as a form of a revision. So let's take a look at rounding off. So let's start off with numbers. For example, I have the number 26 and I want to round it off to the nearest 10. So this is the tens place, and when I want to round off to the nearest tens, I'll look at one place value before the tens place, which is the ones place, which is 6 here. So because 6 is more than 5, I will round upwards. Okay. Conversely, if I were to round off 23 to the nearest tens, okay, so again, I'm rounding off to the nearest tens. So I'll be looking at one place value before the tens place, which is the ones place. Okay, and we will compare it with 5. Okay, because 3 is lesser than 5, so we'll round downwards and it will be 20. So if we look at approximation, we can always say that 5 is the determining number. Okay, so if the number is 5 or more, we will round up. If it's less than 5, we will round down. So let's talk more about this. Now let's take a look at this example. So you're asked to round the following to the nearest 100. So if you are going to round something off to the nearest 100, okay, so let's take a look at 634. So the hundredths place is 6. So we are going to look at the place value right before the hundredths place, okay, to decide whether we round up or down. And 5 is the determining number. Anything that is 5 or more, we'll round up, and anything that is 5 or less, we'll round down. So now let's take a look at this. So we have 3. So 3 is lesser than 5. So we'll round down. So we will keep this 6 and make it 600. So when we round off 634 to the nearest 100, it will simply be 600. Next, let's round off 298 to the nearest 100. So because we are rounding it off to the nearest 100, we will look at one place value before the hundredths place, which is the tens place. Okay, and if it is more than 5, we will round up. So that means we will increase the hundredths place by 1. So if I take a look at this, now this is 298. So I need to look at 9, which is in the tens place, to determine whether I round up, that means make it bigger, or round down, which makes it smaller. So now this is 9, right? So 9 is more than 5, so I'll round up. So if I round up, it just means that I'll increase the hundredths place by 1. So from 2, it becomes 3. Okay, so when I round this off to the nearest 100, it is 300. Moving on to the next example, 599 round off to the nearest 100 will give 600, because I will check the tens place, and the tens place is more than 5. So I'll be rounding up. So I'll increase 5 by 1, which becomes 6. And now I'll have 600. Rounding off 612 to the nearest 100 gives me 600 as well. Because if I were to look at 1, which is in the tens place, okay, it is lesser than 5. Okay, so I'll round down. So I'll keep this 6 here and then change the rest to 0. Next, 789 when rounded off to the nearest 100 will give me 800, because, okay, to round something off to the nearest hundreds, I will check the tens place, and the tens place is 8, which is greater than 5. So I will increase the hundreds place by 1. So from 7, it becomes 800, right? Now let's move on to others. Okay, so now we are going to round these off to the nearest thousands. So how do we round something off to the nearest thousands? Well, recall, if we want to round something off to the nearest whatever, we'll look at one place value before it. So one place values before thousands is the hundreds. So we'll check the hundreds place to determine whether to round up or round down. So what I'll do first, for all these examples here, I will highlight the hundreds place. So let me do it. Okay, so I know that I need to check these highlighted portions, okay, against 5. If it is 5 or greater, I'll round up to the next 1,000. But if it's if it's lesser than 5, I will keep it to that 1,000. So let's do example 1. So we know that we need to check this 2, which is in the hundreds place. So 2 is lesser than 5, so we'll round down. So we'll keep this 1,000 and just change these to zeros. Next, we are going to round 83,249 to the nearest thousands. So to do so, okay, we will check the hundreds place. Okay, and the hundreds place is 200, right? And 2 is lesser than 5. So we will round down. So in other words, we just keep these numbers as they are, okay, and then just change them to 0. Next, I will round 32,514 to the nearest thousand. So I'll check the hundreds place. So the hundreds place is 5. Okay, so because it is 5 or more, I'll round up. So I'll increase the thousands by 1. So from 32,000, now it becomes 33,000. All right. Next, moving on to this, I have 69,992. So because I'm rounding off to the nearest thousand, I'll check the hundreds place, which is 9, and 9 is greater than 5. Okay, so because it is greater than 5, I'll be rounding up. So 69, I'll round up, okay, by 1,000, it will become 70,000. Next, 12,199. So in order to round it off to the nearest thousands, again, I'll check the hundreds place, and the hundreds place gives us 1. So 1 is lesser than 5, so we'll round down, or in other words, we keep the thousands place as what it is. So when I round off 12,199, it gives me 12,000. Now that we have looked at rounding off numbers, okay, now let's take a look at rounding off decimals. So if we want to round numbers off to the nearest whole number, we need to check one place value before. So we'll be looking at this, the 10th place, T-E-N-T-H. So the 10th is basically 1 over 10, right? When you put a TH behind, you are looking it as a fraction. So the 10th place is the 0.1, or the first decimal place that we are looking at. So in order to round something off to the nearest whole number, which is this that we are looking at, so we need to check the 10th place. So if the 10th place is 5 or more, we'll round up. So we'll increase the whole number, or the number here, by 1. If it is lesser than 5, then we will keep this. All right. So let's take a look at 2.543. So for 2.543, okay, when we round it off to the nearest whole number, it is 3. Okay, why? We'll check 5 here. 5 is 5 or more, right? So that means we need to round up. So we'll increase 2 to 3. Or we will increase the ones place by 1. Okay, next, let's round off 6.21 to the nearest whole number. So to round it off to the nearest whole number, okay, we will check the 10th place, which is 2. So 2 is lesser than 5. So we will round down. So in other words, we'll keep the ones, which is 6. Okay, 3.009. Here is 0, which is lesser than 5. Okay, the 10th place is 0, which is lesser than 5. So we'll round down, or in other words, we just keep the number here, which is 3. 0.561. So if I have 0.561, okay, and I want to round off the nearest whole number, I will look at the 10th place. All right, so this 5 here is 5 or more. So I'll round up. That means I'll increase the ones place by 1. So it becomes 1. Next, I want to round off 2.435 to the nearest whole number. So I will check the 10th place, okay, to determine whether it is 2 or 3 here. So 4 is lesser than 5, so the ones place remain as it is. So when I round off 2.435 to the nearest whole number, I get 2. So next, let's look at rounding off the following to the nearest 1 decimal place. Okay, so we want to round off to 1 decimal place. Okay, so to round off to 1 decimal place, okay, to determine whether we round up or round down, we will need to look at the 2nd decimal place to determine whether this number remains or we increase it by 1. So let's take a look at 2.543 because we are rounding it off to one decimal place. We will check the second decimal place. So the second decimal place here is 4, which is lesser than 5. So in other words, we will round down, or in other words, the first decimal place will keep as what it is, so it's 2.5. Next, let's round off 16.2194 to one decimal place. So this is the one decimal place. This is the second decimal place, which I need to check. So 1 is lesser than 5. So in other words, to round it off to one decimal place, it becomes 16.2. I'll do nothing, or this 2 remains as it is. Okay, next I'm going to round off 3.009 to one decimal place. So here, is one decimal place, and I need to check the second decimal place to determine whether I round up or round down. So because here is 0, 0 is lesser than 5, so therefore to round it off to one decimal place, I'll write it as 3.0. Take note, because we are asked to round it off to one decimal place, okay, 3.0 is the same as 3, but because we are rounding it off to one decimal place, you must put in the 0.0. Alright. Next, let's look at 10.982. So we are rounding it off to one decimal place. So I am going to change this number. So it either remains as 9 or I increase it by 1, right? So when so it becomes 10.9, or if I increase it by from 9 to the next number, it becomes 11.0. So when I round off 10.982 to the nearest one decimal place, the answer is either 10.9 or 11.1. And how do I determine whether it's 10.9 or 11.1? Okay, well, I need to check the number in the second decimal place. So the number in the second decimal place here is 8, which is greater than 5. So in other words, I round up. So therefore, I round it off to 11.0. Next, question 5, I'm asked to give round this off, giving your answer to one decimal place. So this is one decimal place, so I'll check the second decimal place. So the second decimal place is 3, which is lesser than 5, so I'll round it off to 132.4. Let's try more examples. Next, we are asked to round off our answers to two decimal place. So to round off something to the second decimal place, we will check the third decimal place. Alright. So 2.54324, to round it off to two decimal place, I just need to check the third decimal place to determine whether this remains as 4 or it becomes 5. So let's take a look at this. So if I have 2.54324, so because 3 is lesser than 5, so therefore when I round this to the nearest two decimal place, it will be 2.54. Looking at example 2, okay, to round it off to two decimal place, okay, so I will be looking at the third decimal place and comparing it to 5. So 9 is greater than 5. Okay, so therefore I'll need to round upwards. So if I round upwards, I'll increase this 1 here to 2. So it becomes 6.22. Next, I have 3.00913. Okay, and I want to round it off to two decimal place. So I'll check the third decimal place, and it is greater than 5. So I'll increase this number here by 1. So it becomes 3.01 when I round it off to two decimal place. 10.9999 round off to the to two decimal place. So I will check this number here. Okay, and it is greater than 5. So I need to increase this. So I increase this. 9 plus 1 is 10, right? So I increase this by 1. Okay, so you can look at it as I need to increase this, right? So round up. So if I want to increase it by 1, so if I'm going to round it by two decimal place and I'm going to round up, that means I'm going to increase it by 0.01, which gives 11.00. So this is 11.00. So why I do it this way is because some of my students get confused of what to do when you have so many 9. Alright, so what you need to do is, if you are rounding off something to two decimal place, okay, you are either going to keep the second decimal place, the number in the second decimal place, or you are going to increase it by 0.01. Alright, so if you take a look at this, so if I'm going to round off 2.54324, get to two decimal place, so it is either going to be 2.54 or I'm going to add 0.01 want to read, which is 2.55. So these are my two options only when I'm going to round this number off to 2 decimal place. And how do I determine whether it's 2.54 or 2.55? I simply look at the number in the third decimal place. So if it is 5 or more, I'll round up and it becomes 2.55. It is 5 or less, I'll round down and it becomes 2.54. So in this case, this 3 here is lesser than 5. So when I round 2.54324 to the nearest 2 decimal place, it becomes 2.54. Okay, so it is exactly the same for 10.999. Okay, so for 10.999, okay, if I were to round it off to 2 decimal place, okay, it's either 10.99 or 0.01 more than 10.99. So 0.01 more than 10.99 is 11.00. So I am either, so the answer for rounding off 10.9999 to 2 decimal place is either 10.99 or 11.00. So how do you determine whether it's 10.99 or 11.00? Well, we just need to check the third decimal place. Okay, if it's 5 or more, it will become 11.00. If it's 5 or less, it will become 10.99. So because 9 is greater than 5, so therefore, okay, we will round it off to 11.00. Again, because you are asked to round it off to 2 decimal place, although 11 is the same as 11.00, you have to write it as 11.00 to illustrate the 2 decimal places that you have rounded it off to. Next, let's round off 132.435461 to 2 decimal place. So to do so, we'll check the third decimal place. Okay, and we have and because the third decimal place is 5, so therefore we will round up. So instead of being 132.43 blah blah blah, now when rounding off to 2 decimal place, it becomes 132.44. All right, so what have we learned? So in summary, this is what we have learned. So we always check one place value before, okay, to round off. So if we are rounding off to the nearest 100, so if you want to round off to the nearest 100, then we'll be looking at the tens place. So for example, so we want to round this 4,954 to the nearest 100. Okay, then we will be checking one place value before hundreds place, which in this case will be the tens place. Okay, then we will compare it to 5. If it's 5 or more, we will round up. If it's lesser than 5, we will round down. So in other words, right, if I want to round 4954 or 4,954 up, okay, it will be 100 more than 4,900, which is 5,000. If I want to round it down, so this is round up, this is round down. So round down, I'll just keep 49 and change these two to zeros. So how do I determine whether it will be rounded to 4,900 or 5,000 when I round off 4,954 to the nearest hundreds? Well, I'll check the tens place. If the tens place is 5 or more, I'll round up. Okay? And if it's lesser than 5, I'll round down. So because in 4,954, 5 is 5 or greater, so therefore we'll round it up to 5,000. Next, let's use another example. For example, 1.496754, and I want to round off to 3 decimal place. So because I want to round it off to 3 decimal place, I will check the 4th decimal place to determine whether it is 1.496 or 1.497. Okay, it's either the same 1.496 or you increase it by 0.001. Okay, because 3 decimal place is 0.001. Okay, so now how do I do? Which one should I choose, right? So I'll check the 4th decimal place because 7 is greater than 5. So therefore I'll round it up. So when I round this off to 3 decimal place, I get 1.497.